Hello and welcome to the Advertising Hour. I'm here with Maxwell Ivey, a.k.a. the Blind Blogger. We're going to be talking about Maxwell's life, career, everything to do with his early career, his transition into media and online marketing, and more recently podcasting, and also being an online publicist. So welcome, Max.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you, and hopefully we can encourage or challenge some of the excuses that your audience might have as far as their own businesses or aspiring businesses.
Yeah, I hope so, and hope to challenge some of my own thinking as well. So I'm looking forward to that part of it. You're a writer, speaker, podcaster, publicist, as I introduced you at the beginning. But I really want to start out, at least briefly, in your early career, because when I saw that you were a carnival owner, that fascinated me. And the reason it fascinated me is because I knew you were blind, and I thought to myself, well, of the list of things that I'd expect a blind person to do career-wise, carnival owner is down very far down on that list to start with anyway. So how the hell, for anyone, by the way, because I don't know how anyone ends up as a carnival owner, let alone someone that's blind. So please tell me some of that story and how you started out doing that.
Right. Well, my dad used to say that the only way you get into the carnival business is you either are born into it or you marry into it. And in his time, he actually married my mom, who was the daughter of a carnival owner here in Texas. And of course, I'm third generation. I have some cousins in South Texas who are fourth and now fifth generation in the carnival industry. My grandfather, Ralph Wagner, started a carnival in the 50s after he moved to Texas in the 30s when the Depression caused their family restaurant to go out of business. So he came to Texas after the war. He got involved with somebody else's show, and eventually he got enough money to start his own small company. And at one time, there were 4 families in the Wagner tree that were operating carnivals in the state of Texas. Ours was the smallest and least successful, but we had one of the best reputations in the industry. And we often booked contracts far above our ability to fulfill them on our own, because the committees, they knew a few things. They knew, one, we would pay them what we said we would pay them, even if the temptation was great to keep some of their money in our pocket. We would take care of any squabbles that happened while we were open and avoid having them in the first place. And that they knew we didn't have those rides. We didn't try to tell them we had rides. We didn't. We would just say, look, we have family, we have friends. We will find somebody to help us do this. So I grew up in a family. Everybody else in the family was doing it. When I was in junior high school, I worked in a duck. Well, I can go back before that. When I was 5, my grandmother put me to work in her cotton candy stand, putting the butter on the popcorn and the syrup on the snow cones. From there, I went to working the games on the Midway. Eventually, I had my own duck pond and a couple other kids' games. I actually owned a couple of children's rides at one point. I've owned some bounce houses. But our family did have about a 7 or 8 ride carnival, and we were doing pretty good. We were starting to grow the business, and my dad passed away from lung cancer. And it didn't take us long to realize that we just weren't prepared yet to run the business on our own. So we managed to keep it going for about 3 years. And then we eventually got to the point where we couldn't make our liability insurance payments. And we thought, well, we're going to have to hook up with somebody else's carnival and just, do what we can to make a living.
And what kind of carnival was it? Because in my mind, when I think of Texan carnivals, I think of exotic animals, maybe exotic dancers, maybe just exotic danger. I don't know. Just what kind of carnival was it?
No. I think you're thinking Renaissance Festival, but we had 6 or 7 rides, occasionally up to 8 rides you might be familiar with, but by different names would be flying chairs, waltzer, twist.
Yeah.
I think they call the big slide a helter skelter over there. So we've never had more than 8 rides. We usually would have 2 or 3 rides that the big kids or parents and grandparents could ride with the little kids. And we did, festivals, church fetes, some of the bigger festivals and fairs with contracting with other people. And I did the bookings. I was the one who would call people up on the phone and say, would you like to book our carnival? And most of the time they would say, how many rides do you have? And we would tell them, and they would go, we're sorry, we're Texas. we need at least 2 or 3 times that many rides. So I got told no a lot in just about every way it can be said, and including a couple of times where I got the distinct impression that when they were through hanging up on me, they were going to go take a bath or wipe their shoes. Yeah, so I did that. I ran some kids' games. I helped with the office work. Occasionally, I helped set up and take down rides. And basically, it's a small family business. You just do whatever you have to do from week in to week out to get open.
And so when we're talking about Texas, we're talking about lots of space and lots of competition in this particular area of being a carnival, the carnival market, it sounds. But that was interesting. I didn't know that you used to take bookings. So in terms of just speaking on the phone and how that transitions into podcasting, that you've spent plenty of time on the phone in the past trying to convince people to book you.
Yeah. And I honestly believe that all those years of being told no have, worked out to my favor now, because, I spend a lot of my time asking people for things, either for me or for my friends or clients. I ask for opportunities. I ask for help a lot. I'm getting to the point where I'm now able to provide help to more people more often, but I still, the fact that I'm not afraid of being told no makes me great if somebody wants, say outreach for marketing, or for direct marketing, reaching out to sponsors. And, quite often I help podcasters or other creatives, because while they may feel good about what they're doing, a lot of them don't have the confidence, or they don't have the time or energy to do all that asking for themselves. So it was great. And one of the many lessons I learned from my dad back then when I was doing all that cold calling was, when I would get upset and I would go, I don't want to do this no more, he would say, Max, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. Now, who's the next person we're supposed to call? And that has become one of my number one taglines, and it's so true. It really does come down to, are you willing to ask, and ask again and again and again, and no matter how many times you get told no, you're like, okay, who's next?
And do you miss life, carnival life? I know it's been a long time now, but do you ever miss it?
No, every once in a while, somebody will want to list a piece of equipment on the Midway marketplace, and I'll go, if I had the money to buy that, I'd have to think really hard about going back out on the road. But it rarely happens. In fact, in 2017, I was offered the opportunity to go out on the road with some other speakers and writers in a motorhome caravan. And my response was, no, ain't happening. I've spent enough of my lifetime, bouncing around the country and, raggedy old motorhomes and travel trailers. I'm not interested in doing that again. So, it's.
Do you still have family in the carnival space?
Oh, yeah. I've got immediate family, cousins and nephews and nieces. I also have distant relations who operate some pretty substantial carnivals in the country. And in fact, when I was just getting started helping people sell rides, I wouldn't have had any equipment on the website to sell if it weren't for family and family of family and people who had done business with my dad before he passed away. So, I know that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I know a lot of people, they cringe at asking their friends and family, or their friends and family cringe when they get calls from them because they're wondering, what are they selling next? But, if it wasn't for those long-term relationships over 20 or 30 years, it would have been a whole lot harder than it was. And it wasn't easy anyway.
And what do those people think of your career now? Because it must be so different to not only what it was, but what they do as well.
It's one of those conversations I don't get a lot of opportunities to have. It's almost as if the friends I have in the carnival business or industry, they seem to fall into one of two areas. They either ignore all this other stuff I'm done and just want to know if I've sold anything lately or if I can help them sell something. And usually when they ask me if I've sold anything lately, it's because they're still not, really sure that they're hoping they're hoping I'll say, no, I haven't sold anything lately. And then they can take satisfaction in that. So the other half seem to be, longtime friends who are like, they believe this is what I should have been doing and I should have quit being a carnival owner long before I did. And that I'm happier, more successful and doing things that really help other people. And of course, Corona has also changed the way people think about what I'm doing now, because with so many carnivals either parked or running at, at half or a third of their usual capacity because they can't move and they can't open. The fact that I don't have to depend on that to make a living is, and that may also be a reason why we don't talk about it as much, because I'm sure there's a lot of fear around whether or not they're going to stay in business. And I've been there. I know that fear. And if they go out of business, what's going to happen to the equipment? What's going to happen to those loans and that they have? And, what are they going to do next? So that may also be why, I haven't had a lot of conversations lately. And I'm sure you have probably had friends or family like this. There are some people who I just choose not to talk about it with them because there are old hurts there, and the easiest way to avoid a real argument is to just avoid certain subjects. Kind of like we have people that have finally decided not to talk about the election at Thanksgiving, or at least I hope they have. So. But I would think the majority of them think I was not really well suited to be a carnival owner in the first place, and this was a good move for me.
You were talking a little bit there about equipment, and so I do want to move on to that transition. So you've already spoken a little bit about how your journey ended, at least in the carnival world, back in 2007, I think it was. And now I want to talk a little bit about launching Midway Marketplace. So maybe, can you speak on that transition? Maybe where were you mentally, physically at the end of that journey, at the end of the kind of your role in the carnival world, and then what led for you setting up Midway Marketplace? And I just want to know how the hell you learned all those skills. So there were so many new skills that you had to learn, and I just don't know how you learned them. So I want to know a little bit about how you learned those skills.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do my best to answer, but I will preface this by saying I'm not exactly sure I have a good answer for you on some of this, but we will do our best. Some of those questions, if I had really good answers to them, I'd be Tony Robbins. So, but here's the thing. In 2007, when my family's business started to go out of business, I had to help us sell the rides we had left. I'd helped my dad buy and sell equipment when he was alive. So once we joined up with my uncle's carnival, and he really didn't want us there. He was happy to have us around, but he didn't want us to grow or accumulate equipment. So basically, I realized there was no place for me. Plus, when it comes to doing bookings, that's a real personal part of a carnival owner's assets. And they generally don't want anybody that isn't family knowing where they're going to go and when, because there's always the question of, well, if I get to where I'm going in 3 weeks and somebody else has already been there, it might, they would probably blame me. So it's one of those things. Your bookings are guarded jealously, or at least they are here in the U.S. We don't have the advantage of the showman's guilds like y'all do in the UK and Europe. So I was not invited to help with the bookings. Our equipment was not acceptable either to them or to their insurance providers. So we basically were left with not a whole lot, a food trailer and one kid's game. And as I've said often, it's like, come on, if we have to lose to anybody, why do we have to lose to them? You know what I mean? Because being family, we had competed very bitterly over the years for bookings, to the point that more than once mail had been stolen, answering machine tapes had been erased, that sort of stuff. So it's like, hey, come on, there are a bunch of other carnivals in Texas. So I see the end. I don't have anything going on. I'm suffering some depression. I eventually had a health emergency where I was almost kicked out of a motel in Port Lavaca, Texas, for urinating on their sheets. I go to a doctor, and the doctor says, man, you got to change your life or you're not going to be around long. And he said, and I mean months, not years. So I go home and I see a doctor. I start working on my physical health, which included being treated for sleep apnea, going on some medications to help keep me healthy in the short term, and eventually having gastric surgery. As I started getting healthier, I started saying to myself, okay, so I'm not a carnival owner anymore. What can I do? And I said, the only thing I know anything about is helping people sell used equipment. So I said, I'm going to try to make that a full-time profession. And I asked my brother to help me create the first version of the website. I also asked him to help me file for the domain name, because things aren't accessible now. They sure as heck weren't accessible 13 years ago, especially not part of registering a domain name. So we filed for the domain in September of 2007. The website was finally online in its original version in January of 2008. My brother gets a very high-paying job moving those huge thrill ride attractions for another company in February or March of 2008. So I'm without a webmaster. I got no money to pay him, wouldn't know who to trust if I did, and no skills. So I'm like, okay, I don't want this website to just stay the way it is. I want to be able to change it, update it, grow it. And so I started asking a bunch of questions online to forums for webmasters. Eventually somebody said, why don't you go to the w3c.org school and go through their tutorials, and then after you've done that for a while, come back and ask us some intelligent questions. So I did that. And I went to the w3c.org, and it said, here's how you create your homepage and a link and embedding images or links to other pages. And here's how you do it so people can send you an email. And basically just did it one step or one piece at a time, and I would try it. If it worked, fine. If it didn't, then I would try to figure out, well, why isn't it working? And I tell you, after a while, trying to figure out where that one comma / less than or greater than that's out of sync is a pain, whether you're listening to it or looking at it. And so I did HTML. Thankfully, Facebook came along, so I was able to start, what I would do is I think I just improved the page, and I would post that link to Facebook, and I would say, how does it look? And sometimes they would say it's great, and sometimes they would go, Max, where those pictures are supposed to be? They ain't there. All there is big blank spaces in the page where they're supposed to be. So I just kept doing it, trial and error, one piece at a time. And eventually I got to where I could create a decent website and maintain it myself and not have to pay somebody else to do it. And also, take pride in the fact that I did it. And of course, this was long before I would realize this, and inspired the hell out of a lot of people that I was willing to try it in the first place. So, the only real regret I have about that first website was when I picked the colors, because not being able to see my colors, I went by their names and I picked yellow for the background, because I remembered that when I could see, the toys looked better on yellow than they did on white. So, and then I went with blue for the text and red for the link text and orange for previously clicked link text. I would later find out that the yellow was ice creaming yellow. The blue was a dark navy. The red was a dark brick. The orange was a fluorescent orange, like something you might see on the side of a Formula One car. And, more than once I've been told that the website was so bright that Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder could have argued over it.
That's brilliant. I'm going to have to check that out, see if it's still available on the Wayback Machine.
Go to archive.org, look up midwaymarketplace.com, and go back to 2008. But I will warn you, don't look directly into your monitor, or maybe put on some sunglasses first, because it's vivid. And, on top of all that, I didn't have any way to edit my images. So basically, I would have my brother say, okay, tell me which order I want to post these images in. So I go with the best and then the next best and so on. Well, people would send me images, and some of them, and rarely were their images the same sizes. So I would not only do I have this vivid color scheme, I also sometimes we have 2 or 3 different size images on the same page with each other, because that was, all I could do. And it's one of the great lessons that I teach people. I could have obsessed over the website and thought, this is horrible, let's take it down. Maybe I don't need to do this. But I decided, how the heck with it. I'm going to focus on trying to use this website to sell equipment, because the only purpose the website needed to serve was a place where people could see the equipment so they could fall in love with it and then want to have to buy it. So instead of focusing on the website or where can I get the money to hire somebody to make this look like it's supposed to, I focused on recruiting new clients and advertising the heck out of the stuff I did have, building a mailing list, eventually, coming along with social media, Facebook, and then LinkedIn and Twitter. And, and I think you're starting to see a pattern here. I do stuff one thing at a time, and sometimes I do more than one thing at a time, but rarely. I'm not a good multitasker. And the other thing that I've learned is that I'm really good at just ignoring things that don't matter to me at this moment. And so I do the next thing. And, for a lot of people, having a blind person trying to figure out Pinterest or Instagram, that's like, why would you want to? But it's one of those things everybody else was doing. So I figured I needed to be doing it too in order to promote my website. Why would you want to be on YouTube? Why would you want to record your own videos? And it all comes back to wanting to sell equipment so I could build a business, so I could support myself and my family. And I think it all comes down to something my dad used to say quite often when we would finally make opening. And somebody would go, how did y'all do that? How did you and Max get back here with that trailer load of stuff that should have taken 4 people to load? He would always look at him and go, what? Did we have a choice?
Yeah, and that's the thing that stands out to me as you're talking, Max, is it doesn't sound like you were working from a place of frustration. It sounds like you were working out of a place of necessity at that time. And both, you talked physically about a change in your life at that time, and then mentally as well. There was really nothing for you to lose at that time. You were just learning, and on that route of learning and just trying these things and essentially exploring your curiosity at the time. That's how it sounds to me. It doesn't sound like there is any intimidation or any fear in your voice as you're talking about that. So I guess, is that accurate? Or
Oh yeah, that's definitely accurate. I obviously didn't have anything to lose, but I also had a lot to lose, because when I first started, I thought, the only thing I know is selling carnival equipment. Thankfully, I've learned over the course of my journey that there's a whole heck of a lot of other things that I'm capable of, and some of them I do even without thinking I'm doing them. So that's been great. Curiosity is a great point. One of my favorite books over the last few years is from Elizabeth Gilbert, called Big Magic. It's about the creative process. And she says a couple of things in there that I really love. One is that curiosity will carry you when passion deserts you. And the other is expecting your creative pursuit to support you financially puts way too much pressure on your gift.
That's definitely something that I can hear it as you're talking, that the curiosity factor, and it also sounds like it remains, as we'll talk about in a minute, when you transition into blogging and that experience as well. There are a couple of other things, just so you can frame it in my mind. Even though it's only been 12 years in the world of technology is huge. What were you working on back then? What kind of accessibility tools were you using? You've mentioned W3 Schools, but was it screen reading equipment that you had? What else did you have to support you in that?
Well, when I started, I had a Microsoft Windows laptop with a screen reader. Their version of screen readers is called JAWS for Windows. Unfortunately, when I started trying to run my business from that laptop, we kept breaking them, and we broke 3 of them before somebody finally admitted that in 2008, 9, and 10, the hardware on those laptops wasn't built to support the sound needed for a computer and a screen reader off of the same processor. They just weren't capable of doing it. I was told that I would have to go to an external sound card, which to me defeats the entire purpose of having a laptop in the first place. So at that, about the same time, Apple started coming out with the iPod 4 that had a screen reader on it called VoiceOver. And they were also starting to put it on some of their early iBooks. And called my brother Michael up one day. I'm complaining about this problem because I can't afford yet another laptop, and the people aren't wanting to make good on the one we just broke. He says, Max, why don't you try an Apple? I hear they've got the software built in. You don't even have to think about that. So I said, yeah, but what if I do it and it doesn't work? Then where am I at? He said, well, why don't I just buy you one? You can play with it and see what happens. There won't be any pressure. So he bought me an iBook 4 on eBay. I got to working with it. And, of course, back then there was a huge difference between Windows and Apple when it comes to navigating things. So it was a pretty big learning curve after having used Windows with speech for maybe 5 or 10 years, going back to a previous job. But so after then, I went strictly to Apple laptops. Eventually, about 5 years ago, I went to the Apple iPhone. Now I have an iPad. I'm about due to replace my MacBook Pro, probably with one of their. I may not even have to have a laptop going forward. I'm not sure about that. I've been working really hard to get to the point where I can do everything I need to do from my phone or my tablet, just so I don't have to carry around a heavy laptop. and also, you have the power usage differences between a laptop and a lot of the newer portable devices. So having 3 devices now, all of them using voiceover and all of them having access to the cloud, that's been very helpful. In the early days, my most important piece of technology was a product called Mars Edit, which I still use now. It's only available for Apple. And it's a third-party app that allows you to create your blog posts as if you're working in a text editor. And it has very simple keyboard commands to add links or photos or whatever else you need to add to your post. And then it uploads it to WordPress or Blogger using the back end so that I don't have to deal with the WordPress dashboard. The WordPress dashboard has gotten much more accessible. They have a real dedication to accessibility. So that has gotten easier as I've gone along, but it is, you get into habits. I still find myself going back into entering HTML code instead of using the keyboard commands, and I still find myself going back into using Mars Edit as opposed to going directly to WordPress, just because it's easier, it's more familiar. I can still do HTML code without thinking about it, whereas a lot of the stuff when I do it on the dashboard, I have to really think about it. So that's been a big, the big improvement in technology. And, my phone and tablet do so much more than my laptop would do back then. But sadly, in order for me to access everything I need to online, and I end up having to use different devices or different browsers depending on what I'm wanting to do. For example, today, in order to use Zencastr, I had to open my Google Chrome app on my laptop because I can't run Zencastr from Safari. And quite often, if it comes to filling out a form online, I'll send that link over to my phone or my tablet because filling out forms on those can be easier than filling out forms on my laptop because a lot of times people don't label things properly. And now in the next few weeks, maybe it'll be longer than that because of COVID, as part of my work doing the online publicity thing, I want to be able to work with more companies, and a lot of companies use Microsoft products in their offices. So in order to work with some of the people I want to work with, I have to have access to Microsoft. So I'm in the process of acquiring a Windows computer, and I'll have to learn the new version of JAWS for Windows. And what will end up happening is I'll probably end up having 2 computers depending on who I'm working with and what I'm trying to accomplish. So it's not ideal. Naturally, it would be better if we had, if you could just go to one device and do everything. Maybe with the improvements in the Apple operating systems or improvements on the Windows side, eventually we'll get there. But between the people who build the websites and the apps and the people who design the adaptive software, there doesn't seem to be just one thing does everything well or above average, at least not from my experience. Now, I will finish that by saying I have friends who are visually impaired who are much more tech savvy than I am, who seem to accomplish a lot more with their devices than I do with mine.
It does sound like it's a shame and there's a gap in the market for, well, I say gap in the market. It sounds like there's room for Microsoft and Apple to work together on adaptive software that's universally compatible with all devices. Now, I know that's idealistic, but
Yeah.
you would think in theory to support greater accessibility, that's something that they would want to work on. It sounds very odd that you have to go to the lengths that you have to go to work cross-device.
Right. And then, that doesn't even get into what happens when people update websites, website designers who don't realize that when you use a screen reader, you don't have access to a mouse click. So they aren't aware that they need to create keyboard options for all their mouse clicks, which thankfully Zoom is one of the few platforms that does that, but not a lot of people do that. But just as a recent example, I've been using the website I was using where I met you, recently updated one of their pages from search-shows to search/shows and didn't tell me that they had done it. Even after sending an email to their support people, I ended up finding it by accident by going to one of the show hosts' page and clicking the link, and then, backwards engineering the URL to figure out, okay, well, that's what they did. So,
Right.
Recently, the latest update to the iPhone, they moved the answer call button from the bottom right to the top right. It took me a few hours and a few people calling me wanting to know why I wasn't answering their calls before I figured it out.
Yeah, it would be handy to know those kind of things in advance, wouldn't it?
Yeah, stuff like that. Just very minor upgrades that webmasters and app designers and hardware designers they love to do. I have said this before, and sooner one of these days it's going to get me in trouble. I like to say that any webmaster who updates a product just to justify his paycheck should have to do time.
Well, seeing as we're talking about this topic anyway, I want to go back to Midway in a moment, and then your transition into blogging and where you're at now. But just seeing as we're on this topic, I wanted to know from you just a message from you to webmasters, to marketers, about things that are common frustrations for you. So one of them, for example, sounds like that it would be handy for you to have greater notice about product releases, because the more advanced notice that they can give you about where things are, where they're moving, that sounds to be of benefit. Are there any other regular obstacles that come up for you that are kind of particularly frustrating, like pet hates for you?
Well, as I mentioned, updating websites, and because I have to relearn how to navigate the screen to find what I need to find whenever they make these subtle changes. So they always give you notice, but then they send those huge files with all the updates that they've made. What would be more helpful in an update would be if they had someone on their team or could reach out to somebody and go, somebody who understood that something that small could make a big difference to somebody who can't see the screen for themselves. That would be very helpful. Of course, continuing to bang on about describing your images with the alternative text tag, not using mouse clicks or offering keyboard commands along with the mouse clicks, because the screen reader hijacks some of your keys, and so you don't have that option. For my friends who, it's all about the contrast, it'd be great if they had the option of changing the color of the screen or changing the size of the text beyond what they're capable of doing with their adaptive software, because sometimes that adaptive software can only do so much for them. But if the website could be altered before they use the screen magnification, that could make a big difference. Labeling buttons and links. I can't tell you how many times I go to a website and it says link number 1, link number 2, link number 3, and so on. And I'm like, so I end up having to try each of those links and find out where they go, and then try to remember where they go the next time that I'm on that website. And if it's a good enough website, I'll do it. But, it's just like when people complain about how slow a website loads. They're like, it's taking 5 seconds. I'm going to go somewhere else. So one of the things I think would really help is, when possible, fewer items on a screen, and then having more items come up once you choose one of the options that you have on the main screen. And I understand a lot of website designers are starting to accept that one, at least with the links. But sometimes there's just way too much text on a homepage, and yes, I know my website is kind of an offender in that area. But as a writer, I sometimes have trouble with brevity. Those are some of the things. Selection boxes can be trouble. Labeling form fields. Make sure that the field is not only labeled, but it's obvious as to which field the label applies to, because sometimes you can only figure that out by going to the beginning or the end of the list and kind of pairing them up. So those are some of the things that we deal with. And I would say, if you're concerned whether or not your website is accessible, you can always just ask. And there are some companies that will do that for a fee. I'm not one of them. I don't really think that's what I want to do. But if somebody would like my general opinion of a website, I'm always happy to do that, because, visiting their website, you never know where that might lead for you. And then just the final thing, and it has more to do with blind people as an audience or as a group of customers than it does, any particular technique. And that is the visually impaired and people with disabilities. We are a very loyal audience and we are very loyal employees, but only if we feel like the company that we're doing business with or working for wants us there. So if you are willing to make the effort will be returned to the point that we will even overpay for products. We quite often overpay for products and services if we feel like you've gone out of your way to earn our business. And the same thing with employees. If you make those accommodations to get a blind person or a person with a wheelchair into your office, and of course with COVID, it's getting easier and easier with certain professions, we repay that. We will give you more than, for the most part, we will give you more than you have coming, because we know that there's a very small percentage of the workforce where the employers want us there beyond wanting to check a box off saying, well, we would like to have them here, but we just can't because of A, B, C, and D. So if we feel welcome, we'll come back. If we feel like you value us as workers, then you'll get our best and then some. And that can especially apply during hard times like COVID.
There's loads of great advice that you referenced there, so thanks for that. But speaking of COVID, I wanted to talk about one trend, and I'm interested to know how and if it impacts you at all. And that's this whole culture that's the growth in just video calling. And you mentioned Zoom earlier. Does that impact you in any way? And is there anything that people should keep in mind when approaching things like Zoom calls with people that are visually impaired?
I think that it usually takes somebody a while before they totally understand that a blind person on a video communication platform is still blind. So, I would say the most important thing to tell them is don't be so worried about it. If you do something that's like, man, that was really stupid, I shouldn't have tried to screen share with them. Don't worry about it, because it's how you do things. And what's to say there aren't 3 or 4 other people on the call who needed to see the screen share. And you could always go, well, I'd like to explain this for you, or if you wouldn't mind staying on a few minutes after the meeting, I'll be happy to explain it to you. And then, as you learn and grow and get used to being around people with disabilities, then you go, I'm going to have a Zoom call with this person in 3 hours. I need to send them the files that I'm going to screen share so that hopefully we can communicate with them what will be communicated with everybody else in the room, so that we can get their full participation and the full value of us having them as an employee or a member of our team in the first place. So I think that's the most important thing. Don't worry about it so much. Some people are going to get offended no matter how hard you try or how little you try. That's just the way it is in the world. You know those people. You see them on Facebook. If they get up at 8:30, by 8:45, they are mad at somebody. So, just, in my experience, most people get into more trouble by worrying about it than they do by not. They become self-conscious. They think things are offensive when they aren't. And it also makes the other person feel like you're generalizing. So I would say don't worry about it, and treat each person that you're talking to as an individual, because there is just a wide variety of differences between people with visual impairment, and that doesn't even include the other, many categories of people with disabilities. You can take 2 people that are blind with the exact same disease and vision loss and the exact same technology, and they will come up with different answers just based on their personality and what their life experiences were before they got to that point. So just treat us all as individuals. If you screw up and say blind or handicapped or crippled, just apologize for it and go on.
Just on the topic of hardware and software, I wanted to, because I was going to ask you this later on anyway, but I want to talk about smart assistants. And so things like Cortana, Siri, Alexa, how have they changed your life, if at all? Do you use them?
Oh, I use them and I love them. Me and Siri don't get along too well because she has trouble with my accent, but that's just her problem,
I was going to ask that, actually.
She's not from around here, So, and plus, while Siri was first, she is not the most robust, and she's not the one that's having the most invested in her. So I love Alexa. I don't use Google much, but I like her. My mom uses Google a lot. People like me, we love them because they allow us to control so many things that don't generally come out of the box talking, or even with buttons. I mean, I'm sure if you took the time to notice during the course of your day, I bet you would be amazed by how many devices you use on a daily basis that have touchscreens that don't talk.
Yeah.
And most all of those devices are now connected with Alexa or Siri or Google Home Assistant, and they make things just so much easier. My life would be even easier, except I live in an older home, so updating some of the stuff around me is not really possible. You know, it's cost prohibitive, but the things I can change and the amount of information you can get. Somebody recently posted, you know, you're a writer when? And I said, yeah, you know, you're a writer when you spend most of your time asking Google or Alexa how to spell something. You know?
Yeah, I'm always doing that with thesauruses as well. Alternative words.
Yeah. And the other thing about Alexa and Google that have really helped me, and this is something that I'm sure you have thought of and appreciate on your side, is it allows people to listen to my podcast without having to go to the podcast. You know, wherever they are, if they have Alexa or Google, they can say, hey, play What's Your Excuse, or they can ask for What's Your Excuse to throw on Google. So, or they can say, play The Blind Blogger. And thankfully, I have a good friend named Chip Edwards at createmyvoice.com who has helped me get my blog and my podcast where people can find it on those devices. We have claimed my invocation names, which is the same as claiming your website URL and claiming your brand name if you're into marketing. So that was one of those great meetings I had at a conference where instead of trying to just pass out business cards, I had conversations, and I was like, man, this guy knows something I need. And, you know, the next thing I know, we're friends 3 years later. And there are people now who will send me an email. They'll go, Max, what happened? I can't listen to your latest podcast on Google. And I have to go, well, that's probably on Google's side. And it usually is. But then, you know, so it's great knowing that people are actually anticipating your content and they're looking for it in a place where they can find it and listen to it. You know, they can be doing the dishes, they can be gardening, they can be driving down the road in their car. So that's another thing. Is not only has it helped me by providing me with information and access to equipment that doesn't talk coming out of the box, but it also allows me to grow my brand and meet people where they are.
But I want to get into this topic anyway, so hold that thought for a moment, because I want to, as you're talking about transitioning into writing and podcasting, I want to know how did your time at Midway wrap up, and then how did it eventually transition into your role, into your career as the blind blogger, in quotation marks? How did that happen?
Well, it was. I'm going to say this at least one more before we're through, I'm sure. I didn't really plan a whole lot of this stuff. I was working at the Midway Marketplace, trying to grow the website, and I had a blog, and I was on social media, and people started saying, you know, Max, we are really inspired by the fact that you take on these difficult challenges, that you don't seem to shy away from things that are hard. You just do the next thing, and you do it with joy, and we're inspired. We want you to share more of your experiences as a blind entrepreneur. And after 2 years of people telling me that, I finally said, okay, I will bow to y'all's wisdom. And I had a really good friend. Well, we're still great friends. Her name is Adrienne Smith, and I refer to her as my blogging mama. At one time, she was known as the blog commenting rock star, and she basically taught me everything I know about relationship marketing, relationship building online, and probably part of the reason why I have so many close friends on the internet around the world. And she kept saying, come on, Max, you are much more than a carny. You're much more than a guy selling used rides. And she finally explained it to me this way. She said, well, Max, you have the perfect excuse to do nothing. If you wanted to sit on your couch and eat junk food and watch TV or listen to it, you could do that. And nobody would say the first thing about it because you have a built-in excuse. The fact that you don't take advantage of the excuse and show up is what makes you compelling, especially when people compare that to their own lives. And so many people are really not doing anything but, you know, just going through the motions, doing their daily stuff. And they don't have a built-in excuse. There's nothing stopping them other than them. So I finally accepted after 2 years of saying, no, y'all are wrong. And I started the Blind Blogger, which people had been referring to me as the Blind Blogger on LinkedIn for a while as a means of shorthand, because even now there are a lot of people who don't know more than one blind person. and that blind person becomes the blind whatever. There's the blind poet over in the UK and the blind magician out in Arizona. So I was the blind blogger, and I really didn't want to take that name, but people were like, "We've been calling you that for 2 years. It's the only answer." So went to see if it was available. .com was taken. I decided to go with .net, and thankfully I was smart enough to listen to people. And I often say that, I've really fought the name, and that applies to all three of my names. But, the smart thing to do is when somebody gives you a really good name, just to say thank you and run with it. And as a result, here I am 6 years later. If you Google the blind blogger, and for the most part, if you just Google blind blogger, you're going to come up with mostly, if not all, me. So it's been a great brand name. And so, sometimes it's a little limiting because now I do so much more than blogging, but it is my moniker. It's how I'm known around the world. Thank goodness. Thankfully, I didn't argue hard enough and try to come up with something else. So, but, I was the only blind person, the only blogger that was blind. So that's how I became that. Started the blindblogger.net about 6 years or so ago. My very first post was titled, "I think I'm ready to be an inspiration," because I still wasn't totally convinced. And I have days now where I'm not still convinced, but every once in a while I get an email or have a conversation, or I experience things like sharing my story with you where I'm like, yeah, that is who I am. So I was working on the Midway Marketplace still. I had started the Blind Blogger, and let's see, this is 2020. So that would have been, maybe about a year before I started the Blind Blogger. Somebody challenged me to, I want to get this chronology. Someone challenged me to write a book. They said they needed me to write a book as part of an online summit. They said the way these things work is, people will give away something, or they'll have something, that's discounted, and you sign up for their email list so you get it. They call those things lead magnets, I would later find out. So I said, I've never written a book. I have no intention of writing a book. She said, I think you could write one, and I think you can write one in 30 days or 60 days. And I said, both of those sound insane. She said, well, I want to share my favorite quote from Richard Branson with you, which is, promise that you can do something and then figure out a way to deliver it. And I told the woman, I said, that may sound great, and I like the sound of it. I said, but if this don't happen, I'm going to tell everybody this was your crazy idea, that I had nothing to do with it except going along with you on it. So I started writing the book. She actually sent me a book she had written on writing books. And I start writing the book, and a few weeks later, she gets back to me. She says, Max, there are 4 other women that are part of this summit, and they've decided for marketing purposes that it really should be all women. That'll give it a better hook. And I said, well, I'm not happy, but, I grew up in a carnival family. I've been a lifelong promoter. I like to think that, blood of people like Colonel Parker and Barnum run in my family somewhere. And I understand what it means to want to put, butts in the seats or feet on the ground, or in this case, faces behind the screen. So I said, but I'm not going to stop writing the book. So I continued writing it. I started showing it to people, and I would always tell them, this ain't good enough. It's not ready yet, but what do you think about it? And finally, a friend in California said, Max, this is a great book. It's the perfect length. I don't care if you think it needs to be more or longer. She said, I know who your editor is because you had mentioned her. My friend Lorraine, regularly at wordingwell.com, had helped me with some problems with my website and edited a couple of blog posts. So people knew about her. She said, I know who your editor is, and if you don't send this off to her and start the process of publishing it, I'm going to send it for you. So that got me over that hump. The book is only 82 pages long. And
I wanted to stop you as you're talking, actually. Are we talking about the book Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned the title myself. Thank you for helping me out there. Yeah, thank you for helping me out. An author should never have to be reminded to mention the titles of his books. So that's twice in 3 years now. I'm going to work on that. So yeah, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, A Blind Man's Inspirational Guide to Success came out in January of 2014. And as I like to tell people, sometimes, well, most of the time, one of the best things that can happen to you is to have somebody you trust double dog dare you to do something that scares the heck out of you. And that's pretty much what happened with the book. And as a result of writing the book, I then used that book to compete for one of the Amtrak Writers in Residence Awards, which was a prestigious writing award. They've since discontinued it. But I competed against thousands of people all over the United States and was one of 24 people picked to take a train trip anywhere in North America to have an experience and write about it. And that experience would eventually become part of my third book, The Blind Blogger's New York City Adventures, How You Can Make Your Dreams Come True. And so that book has continued to lead to a lot of other things. One of the dangerous things about writing a book is that once you write one book, you start to have ideas for other books, even though when you get close to publishing that next other book, you go back to that same place where nobody's going to want to read this crap. Who the heck do I think I am? This ain't good enough. This will never be good enough. Why am I bothering? So no matter how many times you publish, you always get to that point before you send it off to the internet and get it out into the world. I like to share that because I think a lot of people have this myth that once you do it a couple of times, you're immune, that, you're no longer scared or have self-doubts. But the truth of the matter is, no matter how many times you press publish, whether it's as an author or a musician or releasing a film, if you're a filmmaker, you're always going to have those same problems. You just get a little better at dealing with them each time you go through them.
It's piecing together in my mind now how this journey took place for you. And it's actually quite fascinating as it starts to unfold. Your experiences are kind of compounding in each career, in each role that you've been into. And then it sounds like the release of this book just spiraled things out of control and you ended up launching loads of other areas. So you released this book and then you've got, it sounds like you've got traveling opportunities, speaking opportunities that come from that. And then I'm guessing the other thing, because you've launched books since, is it's given you an internal bug for moving beyond just blogging and writing to actually becoming an author, because this was your first ever book, right?
Yeah, that was my first ever book.
Back in 2014.
Yeah. And I love the expression spiraling out of control. That's an expression that most coaches would go, I can't believe you actually liked him saying that about your work. But it does seem to apply that, that there is no real plan, blueprint, method, as most people would say you have to have if you're going to be successful.
No, it's great. It's spiraling in the best way possible. Yeah, I visualize it as I'm talking into it. Just there's so many opportunities that come out of it, and the interesting thing as we're talking is I'm thinking back to, as you were describing earlier in your career, you were doing things out of necessity, you were learning, you were doing day to day, and then all of a sudden you're presented with these whole new host of challenges. But that's why it's different, is because when you were learning to start, you were building a business which was definitely a challenge in itself, but you were doing it out of necessity to try and change your career and, as you said, feed your family. But you get to this place in your career where then the challenge becomes just these new goals and experiences, which are just to enhance your life and further your career into new areas. And it's funny because you've talked more about inhibition, or maybe inhibitions, but being a writer now, as you're talking about the release of that book, than you were talking about earlier in your career when you had not much to lose. So there is a lot to be learned there, particularly for writers, about that fact that writing can be a very lonely and very anxiety-riddled process. But you've got through it, and you've obviously got a thick skin, having released several books now.
Right. I'm good at finding the positive in things. I like to say I've spent enough time on my backside looking up at where the sky is supposed to be that I have come to understand that finding the positive is, it takes two things. One, you have to decide that it's there, and then you just have to keep looking until you find something that you can hang your hat on for that day. So, yeah, doing the cold calling for a traveling carnival, starting my own website, they definitely, thicken my skin, to use your expression, to the point where, with the writing and blogging and podcasting, all these other things, that it really has helped me a lot to have gone through all these other things that, really didn't work out the way I thought they were going to being where I am now.
And out of all of those challenges, whether it's, because there's other things in here as well. So there's singing in public and there's public speaking, as well as podcasting and writing books. Out of all of these processes, which are the most difficult, have been the most difficult for you?
Well, the easy answer to that is the most difficult has been singing in public, because there's some like childhood hurt that goes into that from back when I was, 12, 13, 14 years old, having a major loss in my vision as well at the same time as my voice changing, to where there was a time people told me not to sing, that they didn't want to hear me sing. And so I've had to come to understand that my voice is good enough and that people enjoy hearing me sing. And it's funny that I actually came out of podcasting, although at the time I didn't call it a podcast. I was just wanting to record some videos to promote some of the equipment on the Midway website. And since I was going to record a video, I thought, well, I need to have some sort of an intro, and I didn't have a way to create an intro. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just sing a little. And I did a little bit of A Christmas Carol by Nat King Cole, because I was recording it just before the new year.
Nice.
And people said they liked that. And so I did more of it. Since then, I've actually recorded myself just singing and no talking. And if you go to my YouTube channel and look at the statistics, it appears that people enjoy hearing me sing more than they enjoy hearing me talk these days. So that's really encouraging. And recently, with the help of my friend Trent Bray at Hustle Today podcast, I did a virtual live streaming event where I sang 4 songs. I shared 3 of my messages along with the stories that led to learning those life lessons. And it was a great accomplishment. We didn't have a huge audience live. There were 10 people watching it live, but there's been over 500 people watch it since it was released. And so it was good enough that on December 9th, we're going to do another one. And I'm hopeful that at some point I'm going to combine this into in-person live events where I will sing and tell stories and teach life lessons. And the other thing about this singing part that also goes back to podcasting and speaking is the first time I just really sang in public was after a conference in Philadelphia in 2017. It was my very first public speaking event. Yeah, I know. Most people, their first speaking event is in their backyard. My first one was 1,500 miles up the road by train. But that was where they wanted me, so I figured out a way to get myself there, and I did a great job. After it was over with, I asked if I could sing a little just to have a memory of the event. And one of the other speakers comes up, he was also a speaking coach. His name is Azuka Zook. He said, "Max, I don't ever want to hear from now on that you've given a talk somewhere and that you didn't also sing." He said, "Because this could be your thing. This could be part of your brand, especially if you continue to choose music that goes along with what you're talking about." And he said, this could be the thing that makes you unique, makes you memorable, and gets you booked. So I've still had a little trouble accepting that. I have yet to do public speaking event where I have sang a whole song, but I have sung parts of songs while doing public speaking. So, as you mentioned before, this stuff either spins out of control or it spins in on itself, because without the podcast, recording the videos 8 years ago, without the public speaking, I wouldn't have really come to understand that I have a really good voice that inspires people when they hear it. Now, as far as public speaking, the challenge there, of course, is managing my time and trying to understand what kind of reaction I'm getting from my audience. Sometimes that's obvious because quite a lot of my stories are funny, and, you can hear people when they laugh, so that's helpful. Recently, I was given a for sale Braille smartwatch from a company called Dot Inc. in Israel that now allows me to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, now they gave it to me because they see me as one of the top visually impaired influencers. You want to hear something funny about my public speaking?
Absolutely.
I've actually had more trouble with public speaking because of COVID than I did before, because when I do a virtual presentation, I have to turn off my screen reader so that the people listening to me don't hear her trying to talk while I'm trying to talk. So, and when you're doing something virtual, you don't get any audio feedback from the people on the other side of the camera. So basically, when I give a virtual talk, I'm basically just talking to hear myself talk. And I've got to think, okay, this is usually where they laugh. So I've got to leave time. I've got to kind of laugh at my own jokes if you think about it. So it's very disorienting and so much more difficult to give a virtual speaking talk than it is to do one live. And I think the best explanation I can make of this is just imagine any actor you've heard interviewed that's been in an action film that was shot with green screen and hear them talk about how difficult it is to act, not having the special effects going off or not having the monster in the room with you. And it is difficult. So that's been my biggest public speaking challenge as a result of COVID, because I've still been doing speaking virtually. I've spoken to a couple NFB groups. I've done some virtual summits. So, as far as having opportunities, that isn't the problem, but it's really disorienting, and, it's a real challenge. And as I think you've figured out about me, I'm really big on challenges and opportunities and things that I have to figure out. I have recently been told that I'm too comfortable being uncomfortable, and that my biggest obstacle to even greater success is trying to stay focused on the 3 or 4 things that I'm doing right now, as opposed to something that, somebody might suggest that's over the hill for next month or next year.
Well, it's funny you say that. There's 2 questions I want to ask. The first is actually just on the point about your voice and speaking. And I want to know whether you're comfortable with your own voice now. So it's one thing to do public speaking, it's one thing to podcast, it's a whole different thing to sing. But have you actually listened back to that stuff, and are you comfortable listening back to yourself at this point?
I am still not comfortable listening to my own voice, and I generally only do it long enough to make sure that the podcast recording was actually recorded, and try to remind myself what are the points I want to mention in the blog post about it, because sometimes there's a pretty big gap between recording and release. So no, I don't really. But the funny thing is I don't really like hearing my voice when it's recorded, but I have become very comfortable with my voice when I hear it over speakers when I'm doing something live.
Oh, interesting. So it's just a different format that you're kind of more comfortable with. Yeah, that's. I wonder, do you know what that is or what that might be?
I think it could be just a bias, because I grew up in when your only recording method was tape. And nobody liked their voice when they heard it played back to them. So I think part of it is a difference. My voice does sound different coming back at me through speakers as opposed to coming at me from a recording. I think part of it is just bias and something that's in my head.
And I wanted to touch in terms of things that are in your head. That's somewhere what I want to get into a little bit more. And I want to touch on that point about challenges. I want to know if there's anything on your mind right now that has whether someone's posed you a challenge, or whether you've seen something that you want to challenge yourself with that you still haven't achieved but is maybe on your things to do list. Anything there that's kind of nagging at you?
Well, I really missed my opportunity to record a documentary about my travels in New York in 2016. I'd really love to do that at some point. I recently shared the idea of documentary film, and a friend of mine said, "Max, the way you love to sing, why not a play or a show instead, or as well?" So that's something I would love to get to sing on a stage somewhere of some importance. And, just a couple of crazy things that are on my, these sound crazy even to me, but I'd still like to do them list, which I think is different than a bucket list, because most people's bucket list is stuff they could actually see happening. I'd like to appear on Sesame Street. I'd like to sing on the Grand Ole Opry. I would like to be on the first the commercial trip that Branson's going to send out, or that they're going to go out there and make a loop around the moon and come back. I'd like to do that. I have a fear of roller coasters and thrill rides that as soon as COVID is over, I'm looking for some amusement park vendors, or going to reach out to some of my carnival family to try to overcome that, because I hear they're not as scary as I think they are. So that's one of those things I want to get past. As I mentioned earlier, I hope that this whole idea of music and motivation as a live talk is something that could happen, but that's going to require either learning to sing with backing music or finding musicians or something, because people don't seem to have the attention span for my voice a cappella. And one of the things we're having a hard time figuring out is, would people's attention spans be longer in person than they are online? So we're still feeling our way through it. We're going to keep playing around with it virtually, and hopefully someday that will actually happen. It's one of those things that scares the heck out of me. I still haven't achieved bestseller status on my own. So, as an author, you always hope that next book is going to make it to the top of Amazon or New York Times. Mm-hmm. I've just recently got one of my clients a national magazine feature. Her name is Catherine Lyon, and she was featured in a magazine called A Diva, which is it's a women's magazine that focuses on style, fashion, but it also focuses on activism. And she was in there writing about her history with gambling addiction. So still waiting to have my first national magazine article, my first national or international radio or television interview. Even though I know that those interviews are very short, there's a very strict time limits on those, and the results are somewhat speculative. I'd still like to cross them off my list, to say that I've been on Ryan and Kelly or something like that. And while I don't know that my voice is good enough, I would love to do America's Got Talent or The Voice. However, my past efforts at submitting auditions did not go well. So those are just some of the things, and that's just some of the things I can think of right this minute. I have an easier time thinking of things that I don't want to do. People make fun of me. They're like, Max, you're the no excuses guy. You're the what's your excuse guy. You mean there are things you won't do? And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to jump out of planes. I don't want to bungee jump. I'm not swimming with sharks or whitewater rafting. And I'm not getting on any type of attraction where there's a chance I might die. Those are my my hard limits, let's say. So
those are you've got some pretty strong hard limits. So I think those are fair. I don't think anyone can criticize you for not wanting to do those things. I don't particularly want to do any of those things either.
Well, thank you. Make me feel better.
Well, as you were talking, you touched on clients, and this is how I wanted to close out with you today. Is about the last few years and your life in podcasting now and at the moment, and as an online publicist, and in that area of helping clients secure, I think, both podcasts but also media in general. And just to start out, I actually wanted to, it's funny the coincidences that take place when you're recording podcasts. It was only, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months ago that I was reading a story about you, and I only made the connection after we had spoken and organised to do this podcast that I remembered reading this story. And it was from, and I've forgotten the guy's name, but I think his name was Chris, and he is the owner of Podfest. And I don't know too much about Podfest, but he was talking about the fact that he was talking about the podcast community, and he was telling a story about a Podfest festival, I'm assuming over the last few years, where there was a treasure map for all participants to complete by the end of the festival. And he was explaining that you had turned up at the festival and there was no logical way that you could complete the treasure map without support from the rest of the community. And so he explained that each vendor at Podfest was kind of helping and supporting you complete the treasure map by the end of the event. And I was just curious to know, number one, if you remembered that event and that particular story and filling out that map, number one. And number two, just transitioning into the podcast community and how it compares for you to the blogging community from 5-6 years ago.
Well, the one thing that the blogging and podcasting communities have in common is they're both very supportive, encouraging groups. And I have often said if people knew how supportive the online communities are, everybody would have a blog or a podcast or both. I definitely remember that experience from Podfest. I just wasn't sure that Chris remembered it because in the last year, his event went from 200 to 2,000 in 1 year. And there were a lot of logistical challenges. He had to get a lot of help himself in order to make it all come off this past year in Orlando. So I wasn't sure he would remember. But yeah, that was a great experience. And I didn't win anything, though. I filled out the treasure map and didn't win a darn thing.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I didn't win nothing. And here's the funny thing. I have this hard limit of not wanting to jump out of planes, and I'm scared of roller coasters. The grand prize was a ride in the Vomit Comet, and I was so pissed I didn't win. I wanted that, man. I was already priming my YouTube channel. I mean, it's like I already had the Facebook headline. I'm like, what do you mean I didn't win? Man, I was, but I do have a great picture. I'm going to see if I can find it on my phone for you.
Oh,
of
good.
them taking the picture of me with my map, because I was like, I spent the better part of 2 days filling this dang thing out. I want to make sure I got proof I entered. So I've got a picture somewhere of me with the map. So yeah, it was a great experience. And he's right. The podcasters, the promoters, the book publishers, all the different vendors that were there at PodFest this year, they all did help me out with that. And the only thing I was disappointed in is the year before they all had candy. This year, none of them have no candy. So that was kind of a disappointment. Hey, when you have had gastric surgery, you don't keep candy in your house, and it's not like vending machines are generally accessible. So I was disappointed, but yeah, that was a great experience. And I generally find podcasters very friendly and supportive and encouraging. In fact, this year, but on the side, as far as conferences go, this year was the first time I wasn't the only blind person at a conference of the conferences I've been to over the last 3 years. There were 2 blind people and a woman with cerebral palsy in a wheelchair named Wynn Charles, who you might also want to talk to her at some point about being on your podcast. She has a heck of a story. So
you're really good at remembering names, by the way. I've noticed as you're talking.
Well, here's the thing. To me, I wouldn't be where I'm at now without these people. These people made actual, genuine contributions to my success, or were part of my journey. So to me, not remembering them would be an act of ingratitude. It would be totally disrespectful to myself, to my journey, and to the memories that I've accumulated from, and to where I'm at compared to where I started at, if I didn't remember these people and mention them when I get an opportunity to. I feel like connecting people is probably the thing I do best and most now. And then, of course, you asked me a little bit about podcasting and helping people get media opportunities. That's also tied together with my podcast, because I actually started doing interviews on other people's shows back when I was still working for them, primarily on the Midway Marketplace. And I was actually sitting at home. I was depressed. I was disgusted. I'm like, okay, this is another year I can't go to the trade show in Orlando because I don't have the money to go. And I can't see how I'm going to meet people face to face. And, it just it was in my head. So I said, there has to be a way that I can start meeting more people. And I ran across an ad on LinkedIn from a guy named Brian the Hammer Jackson, who was wanting people to come on and talk about their small businesses. So I submitted my name. They picked me. I went on the show. The very first show didn't go so great, but at the end, we laughed about it, and he invited me back the next week. I ended up doing his show for about 6 months. And then I started doing lots of other podcasts and radio shows. And so I'm doing these interviews, and hosts started asking me, Max, when are you going to have your own podcast? And I'm like, when I find somebody who can handle all the technical junk so I don't have to think about nothing but showing up and having a conversation or showing up and talking. That's all I want to do. And see, the bad thing about the world is when you put stuff like that out into the world, it's almost like praying. And so, like a few weeks later, Frederick Bai from Canada, he goes, Max, I would love to help you get a podcast out into the world. So then I'm stuck. So, so we start doing a weekly show where I either do a monologue or we have a guest to do an interview. And I did that with him for a while. So I'm still getting myself on other shows to promote the Midway, to promote my podcast, to eventually promote the Blind Blogger. And, so I've started the podcast, and people start going, hey, Max, how do you end up on all these podcasts? And I started telling them. I would write these really long emails that would tell them everything they needed to know. And then finally, my friend Michael from Oregon, he goes, Max, you can't keep giving all this great information away. You got to start charging for it somehow. So he convinced me to create an online course, which is it's called On the Air, how you can use podcasts to reach new audiences and grow your brand. And it's available on Gumroad for $97. He also, and after that, people started saying, well, Max, can you get me on podcasts? And I'm like, well, I've never done that before. I don't see doing it for profit unless I prove that what works for me will work for somebody else first. So
Mm.
I put the word out that I was looking for some beta clients. I was eventually lucky enough to meet three great people: Alex Okoroji from Nigeria, Dave Steele from the UK, and Tim O'Neill from South Dakota. You'd be surprised how few people will actually respond to you when you offer to do stuff for them for free. I had a hard time finding those three people, but I worked for them for about 6 months. I was able to get them exposure and decided I'd start doing it for profit. So I've been helping people get booked on podcasts for probably 5 or 6 years now. Been doing it for myself for probably 8 years now. 2013. This is almost the end of 2020. So right at 8 years. And I think one of the things, and of course, now I offer a service where I actually offer two services. One is an interactive program to train people so they're ready to be a great podcast guest. Mm-hmm. And the other one is doing the bookings and social media promotion. And actually, one of the things I found out at PodFest last year is that the other companies that offer podcast bookings or media bookings, none of them offer social media or email promotion along with their bookings. So I'm one of the few that actually does that. So, but I started working with people. I love working with creative entrepreneurs. My very first client was a woman named Adriana Gavazzoni, who's an attorney and author from Brazil. And been lucky enough to work with, I think, probably about 12 or 15 different people over the last few years. And I seem to be blessed to find people that once I start working with them, we tend to stay together. It tends to be more of a friendship or a relationship, either, than instead of a straight, business client type thing. And so I'm continuing to use podcast interviews, obviously, as a big part of my marketing. I totally believe in it for other people. And here are my reasons. Obviously, you get to connect with an audience in an intimate setting like this, where we can talk about whatever, you feel like your audience needs to know about me or can learn from me. But the fact that they know you means that they are predisposed to want to like me. And that applies to me or one of my clients. You get to have great conversations and you get to learn just as much as you get to teach. I firmly believe that if I have a conversation without having at least one aha moment, there was, something wrong with me that day. Or maybe there wasn't enough time, because, I fully expect to either learn something new or be reminded of something important that I haven't thought about recently whenever I do a show. And I find that from my guests, from my clients as well. You get the opportunity to have other opportunities, so book collaborations will come up. Some of them are paid, but some of them are free. You may be invited to speak at conferences or have an advantage in pitching conferences if you have a relationship with the host from being on their podcast. Some podcasters also have a blog or a magazine, so there are lots of other opportunities. But here's the most important thing to me as far as doing podcast interviews. This is the most fun, most energizing way I know of to create content and promote my business. This is fun. I would do this even if I didn't have a good reason to do this, because I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy learning some things about you. I enjoy, I'm waiting to see, well, what is he going to ask me? Is he going to ask me something nobody else has asked me before, or in a way that stumps me and I have to think about it for a few minutes? So the emotional value of doing podcast interviews cannot be underestimated. And I put along with that, not just the conversations and meeting people and building the friendships, but when I get ready to do a podcast, my whole attitude towards my day changes. I get my shower, I shave, I put on my nice clothes, I strap on my headset, I go, man, I am ready. Now let's see what's going to happen today. It just has an effect on my mood. And I like to tell people that if you can sit down with somebody and have a conversation for their podcast, and you still feel like crap when it's over with, you need to be doing something else, because you're obviously doing podcast interviews wrong.
You reminded me of I can't remember where this was. I think it was Twitter, but I read something this week that said podcasting is starting to seem like an excuse for men just to be able to have a meaningful conversation together. And I thought about it, and as much as it was slightly maybe offensive, it's completely true. The ability to just have a conversation and see where it leads, and remind yourself of the things that are important, as you said, or learn new things, is kind of forgotten in this day and age, at least in my generation. And the ability to hold a conversation for whatever it is, 30 minutes, an hour, however long we've gone on for so far. But so I definitely think that's true. And you're right. There's a level of satisfaction that you get at the end of your day when you wrapped up the podcast. You feel like you've contributed something meaningful and learned something in the process. And then that can't be taken away from you for that day. That's what I love about podcasting.
No, I totally agree with you. And think about this. Without podcasting, we'd all still have to go to the pub and have a beer to have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah. We actually can't do that in the UK at the moment. We're on lockdown over here, so that's taken away from us. So we have to do it remotely.
I live in Houston, which is one of the parts of the country that never really locked down, and I live in one of the counties that absolutely never locked down. So you can still go to the bars here, but I don't personally go, and I don't personally know anybody who does. So it's it's like, it's dangerous to drink in your own home with people who don't live with you. So why would you want to go? I'm sorry. I'm on the side of the health experts when it comes to Thanksgiving. I'm like, look, yeah, not visiting people at Thanksgiving is going to suck, but nowhere near as bad as going to a funeral by Christmas time.
Oh yeah, completely as well. Yeah, I agree with that. On the I just want to close out with a couple of podcast related questions, and one of them is both as a guest on podcasts and as a publicist. I'm assuming you've seen lots of different processes when it comes to podcast bookings. And I really want to know just your advice or your experience on what makes a good podcast hosting process. And what I mean by that is my goal as a host is just to make people feel welcome, comfortable, happy. Is there any experience or any podcast out there that you think has done a really excellent job of making you or some of the people that your clients welcome?
Well, I think a lot of it just comes down to the personality of the host. And, like they always tell you at job interviews, be yourself. So if your style is not Joe Rogan, don't try to be Joe Rogan. And if you are authentic in your marketing information or the information you exchange with guests prior to the recording, then that's going to come through to them, and they're either not going to want to be on your show, or maybe you won't have as great an interview as you could have. So I like to believe that it comes down to knowing a little bit about the host and their show before you pitch them, so that you don't put yourself in a conversation with somebody that isn't going to flow well. I mean, sometimes as a host, a really good host, you can overcome that, by asking difficult questions or inserting your own experiences into the podcast interview. But generally, you want to have somebody that you click with, which is why we're seeing more and more pre-interviews, so that when you get on the call for the interview, it isn't the first time you've heard each other's voices, or in the case of video, it's not the first time you've seen each other's faces. So you're seeing more and more pre-calls. You're also seeing more and more referrals required. I am noticing that quite a few of the better podcasts will either give preference to or won't take you on a show unless you're referred to them by somebody who's already been a guest on their show, figuring that, well, I liked him, so the odds are if they're friends with him, they would probably be a good guest for my show, that sort of thing. We'd probably have a good conversation. But I would say that's, trying to make who you are and what your show is about as obvious as possible, so that you avoid as many misunderstandings as possible when it comes to people asking to be on your show. Now, I'm kind of lucky in this area because, one, I love to talk. Two, I'm a very friendly feller. And three, not bragging, but with my varied life experiences, there are very few podcasts that I would not be a good guest for. I'm not going to try to talk science or business as it applies to real estate or financial markets or things like that. But there are quite a few areas that I have things to share. So it really just comes down to a matter of kind of host are they going to be, and will we have a good conversation? So, and then on the other side of it, one of the things I think really helps as far as getting booked and also helps avoid these misunderstandings is let the host know what your story is when you pitch them. I honestly believe that people do not book you. They don't book your product. They don't book your services. They don't book your brand name. They book your story. So while you don't want to write them a book, and sometimes I'm guilty of that myself, you want to get your story across in those first few lines or that first paragraph. And the more they know about who you are and why you would be a good fit for your show, the less likely you are to get on a show that's going to be an agonizing interview where you're like, man, what the heck was I thinking? Or I don't know why, or you find yourself in that situation as a podcaster where you're like, I know they're a nice person and all, but I'm going to have to send them an email that says that I won't be able to release this interview on my podcast. So I would say, it comes down to the host being authentic, the potential guests sharing their stories, and, then trying to find a good match. And if you feel like having them referred by somebody gives you a better chance of having a good conversation or pre-interview, I'm finding that hosts don't like to do pre-interviews with me because the 15 minutes they schedule ends up being 30 or 45. And then we're like, then they're like, well, why didn't I just record this and we would have a podcast episode by now? So, but I'm happy doing pre-interviews. I'm happy doing sound and or lighting checks before the interview starts. I'm happy being on platforms that I've never used before that make me uncomfortable because I'm not sure how they're going to work. And I think that's been one of the really cool things about COVID and podcasting is because we have all these, let's call them big dogs of the media world on television and radio that are stinking the joints up because of computer problems that they're having now that they're no longer in their fancy studios. People can look around and they can go, well, that person may be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but they're no better or worse than I would be if I had a podcast. So I think that's really, seeing these idols, icons at, their average best because they don't have a studio and a team of people making them look and sound good. I think that has really helped and really freed up a lot of people to think, hell, if they can do that, I know I can have a podcast that's, as good as what they're doing without the help of all those minions.
You've touched on the topic that I wanted to ask you anyway, and I've completely forgotten about, but it was about, I know this is going to keep carrying. I always lie. I always say I've got one more question and I've always got a bunch, but there's just a couple more. So one thing that I want to...
I'm doing what I love doing, and who knows, somebody's still listening to us, so we're all good.
Yeah, hopefully. It was about the fact, so typically, as far as I'm aware, some people that are visually impaired, they have to rely on their other senses, which means their other senses are then heightened. So, for example, slightly better or more sensitive hearing. And so I was thinking about this from a podcasting perspective. Are you particularly sensitive to the sounds in podcasting? And are you finding that the difference between studio quality and home recording quality, the barrier is getting lower and the quality isn't that diverse anymore? I'm just curious to know from your perspective if there are any points related to that and related to kind of sound engineering that are prevalent in your mind.
Right. I'm gonna answer this in two different parts because they have two different answers. As far as the part about vision loss, the current theory, which is being backed up by science, is that the brain has something called neuroelasticity. I have to say that slowly or I can't say it at all. So
I don't know whether that means you've got lots of it or none of it.
Well, that too. But basically what it means is that the brain is a big computer and it has X amount of computing power. And it spends, depending on who you believe, it spends somewhere between 50 and 80% of that computing power processing visual imagery. So the prevailing theory is that when you no longer have a need to process visual images, the brain reroutes the neural pathways and uses that computing power to process your hearing, sense of smell, sense of touch. And think about it this way: if you have a average photo and you alter it, you edit it on your laptop, you can get one result. But if you have an average photo at, say, a crime scene investigation laboratory or a university computer, they can get a whole nother level of quality out of that final image. And it's the same way with the brain turning that computer power on your hearing or your smell or your sense of touch. So that's the prevailing theory on it. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as audio quality and podcasting, I think I'm blessed in one regard that I am not a multitasker. I am definitely a in the moment mindset type of person. So when I have a conversation, I am generally focused on the person, the questions they're asking, trying to keep the conversation flowing, trying not to talk over them, trying not to talk too long, trying not to spit on myself, just the usual stuff. So I don't really notice audio quality unless it's really bad. Now,
right.
I have friends, though, who will tell me that video or audio quality doesn't have to be very poor at all for most sighted people to go somewhere else and watch somebody else's video or listen to somebody else's podcast. So I recently I was on a video call with somebody. We weren't recording. We were just hanging out in a group, and it got cool in the room. So they turned on one of those space heaters, and the space heater annoyed me to the point that they eventually turned it back off and went and got a sweater. So every so often something like that, but it's very rare because I have the ability to focus in on whatever it is I'm doing.
I mean, number one, the neuroelasticity, I can't say it myself. That's interesting. So I'll probably read a little bit more about that because, like you said, that theory makes a lot of sense logically. And actually, just what you've said there about almost sounds to me like perhaps you have not heightened listening skills, but the ability to focus more clearly or you're more in tune with the conversation than the specifics of the audio. And maybe that's a particular skill that you have.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's one of those things that's born out of my vision loss because one of the conversations I've gotten into a lot is, Max, how do you deal with fear when you travel? Because I generally travel by myself. And they're like, why aren't you more scared? And a lot of it just comes down to I am so focused on getting from point A to point B that I don't really have time to think about stuff that might happen. I'm thinking about what is happening and really focused in on the sounds, the scents, listening to people around me if I'm needing them to tell me what to do or where to go next. So I think a lot of that one of the things I learned when traveling to New York City is that I like to go sighted guide. That's where you put your hand on their elbow or their shoulder and you follow behind them. I prefer to go that way for several reasons. Most importantly is it means I don't have to learn about where I'm going before I get there. I can just basically show up, ask until I find somebody that wants to help me and follow them to wherever it is I need to go next. So, but in big cities, I found out that when you're going sighted guide, you still have to have your cane out because there are a lot of things, especially from knee level down, that the person leading you is not necessarily going to notice or notice in time to keep you from kicking your shin on it. And that also one of those things where you just have to be hyper alert when you're traveling. So you focus in on the things you have to do and you eliminate the things that you really can't do anything about right this minute. And I think that applies itself to, focusing in when I'm talking to somebody, having a conversation on the street or doing a podcast interview. And I think it also helps me when I'm talking to people in person because I think my focus in the direction of their voice and the way I look towards their face, which came from years of practice, is why quite often people that know me for a while, when they're talking to me in person, will forget that I'm blind and try to show me stuff. So, the focus helps. And, sometimes it hurts because sometimes people are trying to get your attention and you're like, I'm sorry, I'm doing this right this second. What was it? About 3 months ago, I'm sitting here at my laptop. I've got my headphones on. I'm working away. I'm listening to the screen reader. I'm just totally focused on whatever online problem I was having. And my brother walks up behind me and taps me on the shoulder like he wants my attention. Well, I didn't know he was coming. I had my headphones on. I'm totally locked in. He taps me on the shoulder. I jerk, strain a muscle in my back, and
Oh.
have to spend a week taking pain medicine. You know, so sometimes being really focused in can be a problem. Just like sometimes having tunnel vision and being so focused on the goal you're after right this minute can prevent you from seeing other options and other opportunities, or prevent you from seeing better ways to accomplish what it is you're so focused on.
Sorry to hear about your shoulder. Hopefully you're over that now.
Oh, yeah.
That's not a permanent injury.
No, it wasn't a permanent injury.
Coming to close out this podcast, I always feel guilty about taking up. This is one really interesting about podcasting. I'm curious to get both your perspective and opinion on it. But I feel blessed to have had this conversation with you today. It's been fascinating to talk to you. And in a way, I almost feel guilty because you've been very generous with your time, giving your time to me for free. And I think about that with podcasting and tying it back to the community, is that the community is so giving from what I found in the podcast space. And there's not a lot discussed in terms of transaction. There's nothing monetary that's often discussed. Obviously, people can sponsor their podcasts and there are affiliate deals and stuff like that you can make. But generally, I do this for the reason that you discussed earlier, because I think you can explore things both introspectively and also give through conversation and learn about yourself and each other. I'm curious to know from your perspective as a publicist, do you think that will remain the same with this boom of podcasting that we're going through now? Do you think you're going to start to see particularly well-known people charge for their time on podcasts? Or is that something you're already seeing and something that's more transactional based?
Right. Well, as far as the podcasting world, I think it's a lovely community. I think how we help and support each other and provide our time and energy, usually for no money. Sadly to say this and be truthful about it, the reason why we don't get into transactional a lot of times with podcasters is that so many of us are doing this for free. So, in order to have a transactional relationship, somebody has to have money.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is people investing in themselves. They're investing in the world, their society, their community. They want to share information. And one of the things I like to make sure I remember to do is to thank you, Scott, for giving me this opportunity, because I know you put hard work and time and effort into this. And I also know that without people like you, there wouldn't be the Blind Blogger or What's Your Excuse. So I really appreciate that. And that's the kind of thing we do. We're doing this to help each other and also to help the people that listen or watch us so that they can be better. Now, as far as transactions, yeah, there are affiliates, there are sponsors. I've recently learned that one of the reasons why more podcasts don't have sponsors is they call it sponsorships. I have managed to find 2 people over the last year or so that have sponsored my podcast, but they did so because I called it an investment. I explained that they were investing in me, in their company, and in the future of the podcast, that it would drive traffic to their websites and let people find out about their product or service. So I think, like with a lot of things, it comes down to the language we use. So if you're afraid of asking people about sponsorships, or, if people, when you talk to them, they think you're wanting thousands of dollars, try using the expression invest and see if you don't know some small business owners who are struggling just like you are, trying to build something, and who might be willing to sponsor or invest in your podcast for, say for £100 or a couple £100 or, a couple $100 over here in the U.S., because you will find out there are people out there, and some of them are listening to your podcast and they love your podcast and they would like to, in many cases, they've even thought about sponsoring a show, but they're like, I could never afford to do that because I don't have thousands of dollars. So having those conversations with people that follow you or businesses you're connected with on social media about allowing them to invest in your journey, to join you when you're in the early days or the middle days without a huge investment of cash, and grow together, I think those are great opportunities and I love doing them. Affiliate sales are cool, but quite often there are so many people selling the exact same affiliate product that it's very difficult for you to get that return on investment. For those people watching that are podcasters, I'm going to share this link because I just found out about it. It's free. It's called podcorn.com. It's a place where you can submit your podcast, and sponsors will find you, or you can pitch sponsors. It's free. They take a percentage of the gross, but I'm perfectly fine giving up a percentage of the gross to the agent if they get me work, you know. Mm-hmm. After all, I'm a publicist. I get other people booking, so it'd be kind of wrong. It'd be very hypocritical if I was like, no, I don't want to give these people part of my money I have some problems with the lack of accessibility on their website that I've reached out to them about, but I have I was very impressed with the number of companies and types of opportunities that are available there for other podcasters. So I hope they will check that out. And then as far as people paying to be on podcasts, that's already a thing. Some hosts, it's their business model. They're charging hundreds or thousands of dollars for you to be a guest. And of course, they will tell you what kind of marketing package they're going to use to get your name out there. I personally refuse to pay anybody that kind of money to be on a podcast, especially as long as there are so many opportunities where you can still get booked for free. However, if I run across a podcaster who's looking to get, 25 pounds or $25 to cover some of their regular expenses for doing the podcast, or if they ask for a donation of whatever amount I'm willing to contribute, I like those. I respect those, and I will quite often go ahead and do those shows. We're starting to see some shows that require you to put up a deposit because they're doing their shows live, and the last thing they need is a cancellation and trying to figure out who to put in your spot if you don't show up. So you're starting to see that. You're starting to see hosts pay guests, which I never thought I would see that. It doesn't happen very often, but there are some guests who have publicists that will reach out to shows and they'll go, I think my client would be great on your show, and we only charge X amount of money to be on the show. That isn't very common yet, but it's starting. And then I already mentioned how some hosts are no longer booking you unless you can get a referral. More and more pre-interviews, more hosts that are creating the social media posts in advance so that guests have no excuse to not promote their interviews. I tell you the one thing that I run into as a publicist that I don't understand at all is when I book a client, the last thing I tell the host, and I'm usually copying the client on these emails, the last thing I say is, please let me know when the interview goes live, or if it's live stream, please give me some notice as to when you're going to start so that I can co-promote. I can't tell you how few times, how few times, I guess is the right word. Let's just say I'm very disappointed that people don't give me more notice that they've released a podcast episode, either the client or the host, after I've told them, hey, let me know when it goes live. I'm going to co-promote. I mean, most hosts are like, I'll be happy if the guest promotes. And I'm like, and on websites where you have to use a submission form, I'll put my email there at the end. I'll go, hey, I know you're going to reach out to the client, but just send me an email. That's all I want, I would prefer it if they send me their headshot or their show logo and their show description or their bio and their links and the embed code so I can put the player on my website. I would love those too, but I'd be happy if they would just send me the darn link. Go, here, Max, the podcast went live, and then I can go grab that stuff for myself. I hate the extra work, but I'm willing to do it because, like I said, most of the other publicists don't do the social media promotion. And when when there's something you do extra for your clients so that they can get the most out of their interviews, it'd be great if I got a little help.
Well, that's a great way to close this episode, because you'll definitely be getting the help from me on that one, because I can't spend an hour and 45 or however long we've spent together without taking your advice. So I'm definitely going to take that advice.
Well, I appreciate that. And here's the great thing about this. We have spent almost 2 hours, most of which I was not paying attention to how long we have been here. If you hadn't told me how long we've been on, I wouldn't have noticed or cared, because we're having a great conversation. I could see us closing a pub in the UK someday, somewhere long in the future when they allow us to travel again.
Oh, that would be nice.
This has been fun. I've enjoyed hanging out with you. I've enjoyed answering your questions, and I hope we have helped people to, to just go, okay, I know this is scary. I know this is hard, but if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? That's what I hope. I also hope people will visit my website, theblindblogger.net, and reach out to me. I like to tell people, look, if you don't have at least one person in your circle already who will encourage you when you need it or kick you in the ass when you need that, then you need to find one of those people. And if you want to reach out to me and have me be one of those people, I'd be more than blessed and honored to become your friend and connect with you online and see how we can help each other. Because I honestly believe every time I open an email, it's an opportunity. It's a possibility to make a new friend, a new relationship, a new business opportunity, a new client. It could even be just a new funny video to go listen to. By the way, I follow Bonnie the puppy on Twitter. That girl, that woman's human that writes for her. She is funny. So, stuff like that. You just never know. And I find a lot of people are like, yeah, but if I don't want to hire him, book him, or buy something from him, he probably doesn't want to hear from me. No, that's wrong. So head over to theblindblogger.net, just ask at theblindblogger.net. And I really have enjoyed spending the time with you. I would do it again in a heartbeat or half a hiccup. and I consider you my friend now. I do sincerely look forward to getting to meet you at some point in the future. And just see where life has to take us and our podcasts and our brands and our communities. I mean, who knows who we've affected today or who we will affect tomorrow, as long as we continue to show up and let people see us, let them see us at our best, at our worst, and whatever happens to pass for in between on whatever day they see us.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Max. In the carnival spirit and taking it full circle, I feel like we've eaten all of our cotton candy. We've spent all our money on the tin cans. and now it's time to turn off the generators. I'm assuming that's what you do when you close a carnival at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You
got it. Yeah, you got it right. Yeah, you close. You lock up the office, you close the ticket box, you put out the sign that says when you're going to open tomorrow, and then you go turn the generator off. You have it exactly correct. And then you go grab something to eat of your own, and you go to sleep, and you get ready to do it again the next day. So, all right, I just want to say one last thing before I go, okay?
Yeah, go for it.
In the UK, y'all have what's called a Showman's Guild. It represents people in my industry. When I was growing up, my dad always said, Max, if you have a choice between being a carny or a showman, always aspire to be a showman. So after spending a couple hours with you, Scott, I believe that you are a showman. And that's the best I can say about a person. So it's great talking to you, and I'll let you go eat.
Brilliant. And you too. Take care. See you.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.